We're recording, and welcome everyone to the 117th episode of MOSS. It's Off-Road Vehicle Safety and Trails, and our guest today is Joe Unger. So Joe, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and you can jump right into your presentation.
Yeah, thank you there. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Unger. I am the Off-Highway Vehicle Program Consultant for Minnesota DNR. I'm actually housed in our Parks and Trails Division, which manages all of our state parks, as well as state trails, state forest trails, snowmobile trails, you name it, trail-wise, except for Hunter Walker trails. The Fish and Wildlife gets to have fun with those. We manage them here in Parks and Trails. Today, we're going to talk about our off-highway vehicle program. I'm going to get into a little bit of what is an off-highway vehicle, some of the planning process that goes into designing and building trails, and some of the do's and don'ts when you're out there actually on the trail. So with that, I'm going to start the presentation here. So for start on off, what is an off-highway vehicle? Um, Off-highway vehicle, or OHV, is really an umbrella term for what's really four different types of off-highway vehicles that are out there. The first two are ATVs, or all-terrain vehicles, and these are what people probably traditionally think of as an OHV or an off-highway vehicle. We have the Class 1 ATV, which is up to 50 inches wide and less than 2,000 pounds. And a lot of times these are what you might think of as the traditional four-wheeler or quad, whatever you call them, that you straddle the seat and it has handlebars. There are some Class 1 ATVs that you might think of as side-by-sides that are still at that 50-inch width. Class 2 ATVs are between 50 inches and 65 inches wide and less than 2,000 pounds. And these are typically what you think of as side-by-side. So think of like your Polaris Ranger or your John Deere Gator. Those types of vehicles are your Class 2 ATVs. We then have OHMs, or off-highway motorcycles. These would be your dirt bikes. They're on two wheels where the rider straddles the seat, has handlebars, brakes, headlight, tail light, um, all that kind of stuff. And then you have your ORVs, or off-road vehicles. These are vehicles that a lot of times people think of as trucks or Jeeps, but they really run the gamut of what an off-road vehicle is. A lot are custom built rock crawlers. So those are vehicles that go very slowly over rocks or other obstacles, and kind of created managed terrain for them. And then also your Jeeps, as in the picture here. But also a big thing to note is some of the newer side-by-sides that folks might think of as a Class 2 ATV is really considered an ORV here in Minnesota, because they may be either over that 2,000 pound weight or over the 65 inch. So when you're out there looking at purchasing an OHV, just keep that in mind. With some of the heavier or wider ATVs, they could be considered an ORV when you're out riding. So where to ride? I think Benji put a link to this map in the chat, because I know it is very difficult to read on such a small screen. But basically, it kind of gives you an idea of where the trails are in Minnesota. You can see a lot of our opportunities are up in the northern portion of the state, where there's a lot of public lands, whether that be state forest lands, county managed lands, or national forest lands. And we do have a couple opportunities down in the southern part, but because of limitations, a lot of our opportunities are up north. It's important to note too that this map is really just showing what's either managed by the DNR or within our grant process, which I'll talk about in a little bit, our grant and aid process. So there could be other opportunities out there, especially northern or national forest opportunities, or some counties have trails that may not be on this map because they're not within the DNR process. State forests offer a good place to ride. In state forest, there's really three classifications when you're out there riding. So this is really important to understand. And what I have here is in simplest terms of the closed, limited, or managed. There are some nuances to each of these, which I'll talk about a little bit, but for more details, again, there's the link to the OHV homepage in the chat. Just go to that, click on the rules and regulations, and you can get some of those nuances in there. So the first one are closed state forests. These are forests where, just as it says, OHVs are generally not permitted to travel. There's a few minor exemptions, like on public waters during ice fishing season, but for the most part, OHVs are not permitted in closed state forest. Limited state forests are a little bit are different. These are kind of like the medium bunch. OHVs are only permitted on state forest roads and on trails that are posted as open for that use. So the trail has to be mapped and signed as open for that use um, in a limited state forest. And then managed state forests, OHVs are permitted on forest roads and trails that are not posted closed. So that means that if a trail is posted closed, the OHVs is permitted to go there. But if it's not, or if it is posted closed, then you're not permitted to ride on that trail. And also in a managed forest, it is illegal, and actually in all the forests, to damage any vegetation or standing timber or anything like that when you're out riding. And of course, not permitted to go in any sort of wetlands or open waters or anything like that. You want to make sure that you stay on the trails, and when in doubt, just look for the signs. Even in a managed state forest, trails are well marked, and just stay on the trails to be out there and have fun. Um, so just some examples of some of the things that you might see out there on trails. We have the Voyageurs Country Trail, which is in St. Louis County. You can see that's a bridge that they built a few years back. Very heavily engineered bridge. It's one of the gems of their trail system, and I wouldn't expect to see bridges that fancy on all of our trails. Then we have some other trails in the southern part of Minnesota. So the Snake Creek Trail, which is in Wabasha County, um, in the Blufflands, and you get some really nice overviews of the bluffs, and really pretty in the fall time. As a lot of folks know, southeastern Minnesota gets a lot of colors and a lot of fun uses in the fall time. The Chatfield Trail, again in southeastern Minnesota in Olmsted County, is really unique in Minnesota in that it crosses a lot of farmland and a lot of different encounters that you may not see on trails. And you need to watch out for cows on that trail. You can see in that picture they have the cattle gate there to cross, and just some unique opportunities there in Olmsted County. Then some more developed trails. So the Iron Range Off-Highway Vehicle State Recreation Area, which is managed by the DNR. This is an old mine pit that the DNR purchased for the intention of off-highway vehicle trails. And it has some of our more challenging ORV trails in, as I mentioned earlier, those custom uh, rock crawlers. You can see one there working one of the trails in the Iron Range. Single track off-highway motorcycle trails. So this is a picture that I took inspecting some trail last spring or last fall up in Lake County on the newly opened Alger Grade OHM trail. You can see the OHM trails are generally very narrow, and for this one, especially with a rock face on one side and the trees on the other, it really provides that tight experience that a lot of OHM riders enjoy. And then the Spider Lake Trails, which is in Cass County. Um, this is an opportunity in northwestern Minnesota that's open for all three OHM, ORV, and ATVs. Um, has a lot of trails, and it's also one of our more popular areas for off-highway vehicle riding. So yeah, just I want to throw some examples out there for folks to see of some of the things that you might experience. Of course, there's lots of other trails. We're up to close to 100 different trails now. So these are just some of the neat experiences that you can see out there. So how trails are planned. So we really, there's two methods when it comes to trail planning, and both of these have a public input process. So I just wanted to put that out there, make sure that folks are aware that whether you ride OHVs or not, there's always a way to comment on when trails are coming in. The first is called the Grant and Aid program, and a majority of our trails are within this Grant and Aid program. And what that is, that's when the DNR provides a grant to a local government sponsor. So that would be a club or I'm sorry, a county or a township in most cases, or a city, who generally partners with a club to build and maintain a trail. And the DNR works, we provide technical and financial resources for that trail. The second is DNR designated trails, and these are in our state forests. And these are trails that the DNR is solely responsible for. So the DNR does the planning for the trail, the construction, and the maintenance of the trail. Like I mentioned earlier, the Grant and Aid is a cost share program, and the DNR will reimburse up to 90% for the cost of maintenance for that trail. And new trails within the Grant and Aid program follow a 7-step planning process, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And then for DNR designated trails, again, these are trails that are generally built and maintained by the DNR. We may enter a partnership with a Grant and Aid club to help with certain aspects of building and maintaining the trail. Sometimes the clubs may have or local governments may have different expertise, and they can help with some things, and the DNR helps with other things when it comes to our DNR designated trails. And these follow a trail plan process that's fairly similar to the Grant and Aid, and I'll share that on the screen here in a minute too. So the Grant and Aid trails, like I mentioned, follow a 7-step process with the DNR, and it's really 8 steps, because the step 0 is where, even though it only has one item, this is really where a lot of the work happens. And the more work that happens in the step 0, the easier the rest of the process goes, because like anything else, if you plan more ahead of time, things tend to go smoother in the long run. So this is where the club and the local government will identify a potential route for a trail. They'll coordinate with the DNR. There may be some early public coordination in the step 0 as well, to make sure that the route will be feasible for a trail. Once all that gets done, and again, that can sometimes take a couple years to get through that step 0, because you want to make sure that all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed. That's when really the grant funding review process gets started. And these first 4 steps are really the key of that initial review process. So the club and sponsor will submit an application to the DNR, Parks and Trails Division. Then we'll take that application, review it, make sure that all the necessary information is in there, and then we'll send that out to a local DNR interdisciplinary team for review and comment. So these are people like in fish and wildlife, or forestry, or ecological and water resources, or enforcement, or lands and minerals. So they'll have a chance to review it at that point in that step 2. And whatever comments are received, Parks and Trails will take those back to the club and the local government sponsor to address those. Again, we hope that some of that stuff is taken care of in that step 0, so that there won't be much additional comment, but it just helps make sure that all the divisions are covered. Step 3 is when Parks and Trails then takes it out to our regional review team, just to kind of verify and make sure that nothing was missed during that local area review. And then step 4 is when we get into some of the environmental review plan. And so we submit the application for an environmental review needs determination. which is coordinated by our environmental review unit in ecological and water resources. And they determine if a EAW or an environmental assessment worksheet is necessary. And during the step 4, we also do our public review process. So this is um, where everyone else becomes involved, and we send out all the projects for a 30-day public review period. This is typically announced in a DNR news release. So if you haven't already, I would highly encourage everyone on this call to sign up and get those DNR news releases. Excuse me. And then every time that any sort of DNR project is going out for public review, you'll be one of the first to know. It will be in your inbox. Then these final 3 steps, these are done on all the projects once we finish that review page. And excuse me for 1 second. Um, so the final comments are reviewed by our DNR regional management team one more time, and if they're satisfied by the comments and our responses to them, um, they will recommend having the grant contract executed, which we take care of here in the central office for the DNR, which is in St. Paul. And then step 6 is when any necessary permits and construction can happen. So if the club needs permits for any part of the trail, usually that stuff will be discovered during the steps 0 through 2. What permits are needed. This is when they'll apply for them and then begin construction. And then finally, step 7 is that ongoing maintenance, and also DNR Parks and Trails working with the local government sponsor to monitor and inspect the trail on an ongoing basis. So usually once or twice a year, the sponsor in coordination with the DNR will check the trail and make sure that it's up to the standards. So for DNR designated trails, there's kind of a similar process, but there's some more public input opportunities up front, because when we go into this, we really don't have that full vision. We're reviewing a forest for the entire state forest review. And whoops, sorry. So we review the forest, we get some public input of what people want and don't want in the forest. We'll generate some proposals based off of that public input and have those reviewed by the DNR area interdisciplinary team. So that's that same team that during the grant and aid process reviews projects during that step 2. Once we have a proposal done and working with that interdisciplinary team to develop that proposal, then the project goes out for a 60-day public review with a public meeting. So that's again where it's a little bit different, and the public review is a little bit more intense because this is the DNR saying that we're going to build and maintain this trail. So we'll review the comments, do the final environmental review based off of any changes made during that comment period. And then it's actually reviewed and designated by the commissioner. Once that's done, then we're good for our permanent in construction with DNR designated trails. So kind of jumping back to some of the rules here. Oops. I'm sorry, pushed the wrong button. So you want to register your OHV. How all those those grant and aid trails and those DNR trails are funded are through registration dollars. So the program actually gets no general fund money. It's all funded through registration as well as a portion of the gas tax associated with on-trail use. So it's not the gas tax associated with driving on roads or driving your car or anything like that. It's just for OHVs on trails, similar to how with boats and snowmobiles as well. So you want to make sure that your OHV is registered. You can see the cost there for ATVs. It's $60 for 3 years. OHMs, it's $30 for 3 years, and ORVs is $30 for 3 years. Or you can buy a resident trail pass for $20 for 30 days. Um, on the side here is just an example of what your registration looks like. And you just stick that to your registration plate if it's an ATV. For OHMs, it depends if it's also street legal or not, whether you stick it on the back or on the front. And same with ORVs, it depends if the vehicle is street legal or not. For non-residents can get trail passes as well. These are a little bit funded a little bit differently. So for ATVs, it's $30 a year. OHMs, it's $20 per year. And ORVs, it's either $20 for 1 year or $30 for 3 years. And like I mentioned before, these fees go directly back into the program. They're what fund the grant and aid as well as our DNR designated trails. And then the do's and don'ts of being on the trail. So kind of a longer slide here, but some things to consider before you heading out on the trail. So please do read the OHV regulation books before heading out. They do change yearly based off of what changes in state law. So even if you've been riding for years, just make sure that you take a look through that book, make sure that nothing's changed or what has changed, what you want to do while you're out on the trail. Do take a safety class. So a couple notes on safety classes. So if you were born on or after July 1st, 1987, you are required to take at least an online safety class. If you're between the ages of 10 and 16, you do have to take a hands-on safety class in addition to that online. So that's for ATVs. For off-highway motorcycles, you're required to take a online safety class between the ages of 6 and 16. And for ORVs, we there are no safety classes required, but we do offer them, and you have to be at least 16 years of age to operate an ORV on a trail. So, uh, but even if you're not required to take a safety class, it's still encouraged to take. You can still learn some good stuff in there. And with accident statistics, most most of the accidents that happen with OHVs happen with people that have not taken a safety class. So just make sure that you take it and pay attention. Make sure that you're wearing all the appropriate safety gear. So that includes a helmet, seat belts if they're in the vehicle, boots and long sleeves and pants. You want to just make sure that you're wearing this stuff, even if it's not required. So, um, adults don't necessarily need to wear all that on all the different types of OHVs, but make sure that you're wearing it just because your helmet can't tell or your head can't tell, or I guess I should say the rock can't tell if you're, 19 years old or 17 years old. So you want to have that helmet on to protect yourself. Um, Make sure that you clean your OHVs before and after heading out on the trail. You want to clean all the little nooks and crannies. Make sure that you get any sort of seeds or anything like that, so you're not spreading invasive species into other areas of the forest. And also cleaning your OHV helps keep the maintenance of it up to par as well. Make sure that you're following all the trail signs and yellow directional markers. Make sure that you are following the yellow ones. So in Minnesota, our OHV trail directional markers are yellow. Our snowmobile ones are orange. So when you're out there on the trail, just make sure that you're following the yellow ones and not the orange ones. Have respect for other trail riders. I'll be talking about this here in a minute, get into more detail, but we have a lot of trails out there that are open for multiple uses. So just make sure that you have respect for others who are out there enjoying their recreational experiences as well. And finally, for the dues, join a club. Like I mentioned earlier, a majority of our trails are in that grant and aid program. That means that they're built and maintained by clubs and volunteers. As with any other sort of volunteerism, it can be a challenge at times to get people to go out and volunteer. So just join a club. You might learn a few things from the other members of the club. It gives you a group of people to ride with. It's all safer when you're with more people, and also work in trail maintenance. For the don'ts, don't drive in any unsafe manner or beyond your abilities, especially when it comes to like side by sides. People tend to think, oh, I know how to drive a car, I should be able to drive a side by side. They do handle quite differently between the two. So start off slow. The first couple times that you take it on the trail and build yourself up. Don't start at full speed or anything like that. Don't drink and ride. This is kind of the big one that you hear. Alcohol is involved in a lot of fatal accidents. So you just don't drink and ride. Don't do it. It's not worth it. It's also important to note that you can get a DUI on an OHV, and if you do, it can impact your normal driver's license too. So just don't drink and ride. Don't carry passengers unless your OHV is designed for it. So this would mean if you're in a side by side, just on the seats, don't have people riding on in the bed of the side by side. Don't have four people on a class one ATV sitting on the racks or anything like that. Um, Only carry the amount of passengers that your OHV is designed to carry. And also, don't drive in closed areas or in wetlands. This is kind of a big one. Um, like the snowmobile system, we have trails that cross private land. You want to make sure that you're not going off in those areas because having the trail there is a privilege, and you don't want to be the one that gets that privilege taken away to everyone else. And also, in Minnesota, we have a lot of really good wetlands, and we don't want to be ruining those by riding OHVs or walking in them or anything else that could impact the wetland. So just some pictures here of some safe riding opportunities out there on the trail. So just wearing your helmets, um, when you're out there, making sure that the helmets fit correctly, as you can see in this bottom picture of the adult checking the helmet for the child. Um, You see in the top picture there, the gentleman in the vest is one of our trail ambassadors. We have a system of trail ambassadors who are volunteers and will ride trails and encourage safe riding and provide information for folks that they notice on the trail, as well as report any trail maintenance issues so that we can get those addressed as soon as possible. When you're loading your OHV back on the trailer, this can actually be one of the more dangerous parts. So make sure that you're still wearing all your safety gear. You're using a spotter on the trailer so that you don't accidentally drive off the side of the trailer or anything like that. And then at road crossings, make sure you're coming to a full stop, look both ways. Um, this goes for everybody in the group. So just because the first rider goes doesn't mean that it's safe for the next rider to go. So just make sure when you're in the group, everybody's stopping and looking both ways as you're driving down the trail. So I mentioned this a little bit ago. Respectful riding equals continuous riding. Um, you want to make sure that you're being courteous to other trail users. Uh, this picture to the on the it would be my left is something that I stole from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, which is our counterpart out in Colorado. But you can see that where OHVs yield to everyone and everyone yields to horses. If you do encounter other uses on the trail, slow down as you pass. Make contact. If you're encountering a horse or other packed animal, pull off to the side of the trail, shut your OHV off. If you're wearing a helmet, take the helmet off so that the horse knows that you're an actual person and not some scary monster coming out of the woods. And do whatever the horseback rider tells you to do, because the horses are live animals, so you want to make sure that you um, are out there on that they're not going to do anything that that will scare the horses. And again, motor vehicles stay on the marked routes. Don't go off trail, um, because if you do, like I mentioned, we have trails on private land or even in our state and national forests that if too many people go off trail, it could shut down that trail for everyone. And just some final tips and takeaways from today's presentation. So again, if you're interested in riding, consider joining a club. Most of the trails in Minnesota are built and maintained by trails or by clubs. And if you're out there riding and you see them working on a trail, thank them while they're out there. Um, be respectful to others out there enjoying the forest. Remember that we all share our state forest. So just be respectful and say hi and chat with them if you're in a parking lot or something like that. Um, remember that riding is a privilege, not a right. So don't do anything that could get that trail closed. Always wear your safety gear. And then finally, just have fun. So with that, that's what I have for today's webinar. Thank you all for joining. And yeah, I'm now available for questions.
Nicely done, Joe. Um, everybody's got a chance to jot down Joe's email and office number if you'd like that, and we'll get into our Q&A here. So if you want to shut down your screen, Joe, that'll there you go. So we got a list of questions here, and Mike was the first one to call it or answer in. Why are tracked vehicles listed ORV even if they're under 2,000 pounds and less than 65 inches wide?
Yep. That's a good question, and it comes back to the definition of an OHV or an ATV. I'm sorry. So the definition of an ATV includes pneumatic tires, and once you put tracks on, those tires are no longer air-filled. They have the tracks and they handle on the trail differently. So they become wider with wider turning radiuses. So it can be more challenging on the trails. If you do have tracks on your ATV, it is considered an ORV, and then you can still ride it on state forest roads, ORV trails, and frozen public waters during the winter time.
Okay. So looks like Catherine asked about the DNR designated trails, how they're funded, and could you share the link? So Benji put a link in there for that. And Catherine asked, what if local government unit, a city, township, doesn't want to have an OHV trail in their community? Is there ways around it?
Yeah, so if if the local government, we would work the DNR, if it's a designated trail, we'd work with that city, county government early on, depending on where the trail is, and they'd be part of the planning process. A lot of times in our state forests, we have a mix of state land and county land, so we make sure that the county land department is part of that planning process. When it comes to the grant and aid trail, the club would need to identify a sponsor. Typically, this is the government unit that the land crosses. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be. So, like, let's say it's a trail that crosses two different counties. It doesn't have to, both counties don't have to be the sponsor. But it's still good work to get the local government on board with the trail and working with them early on. If they end up not supporting the trail, then we can figure out a different route for that trail to go.
Okay. Catherine's next question, what prompts DNR to build a trail? And how is a trail maintenance funded?
Yep. So what prompts us to build a trail is if it's we look at what connections could the trail may be made. So if it makes critical connections between different towns or other trails or different points of interest. Um, we also review the state forest. So if it's the DNR uh, designating the trail, we review what are the current opportunities, what's the current demand in that state forest. Are we hearing a desire from just infrequently from the public um, desiring more trails in that area of the state? And then trails are built and funded for maintenance through through whatever use it is. So I showed earlier the registration fees. Each of those fees is associated with a special account. So the ATV, OHM, and ORVs all have their own special accounts, and those are what fund the trail maintenance.
Good. Um, if a vehicle is under 2,000 pounds but
Mhm.
over 65, which classification, ORV or ATV2?
Yep. So if it's under 2,000 pounds but over the 65 inches, it would
Mm-hmm.
still be an ORV. So it's and or 65 and 2,000 pounds. So it could be it, it just has to hit the threshold from one of those to be considered
Mm-hmm.
an ORV.
And how is the portion of gas tax associated with OHV determined?
Yep. So it was determined a while back through a study of where the gas tax funding was going, and between roads, OHV, snowmobile, and motorized boats. And then it was determined into a report which was submitted to the legislature, and then it was uh, through the legislature determined how much each program would get.
Okay. Chris wants to know 16 years old for ORV or driver's license?
Yeah, so you got to be at least 16 years old. You need a driver's license to drive that ORV if it's also street legal, if it's not considered a trail. If you're on an ORV trail, then you just need to be 16 years of age. You don't need a driver's license to be on a trail, just on a public road.
Okay. Um, this is Catherine here,
Mhm.
when would the DNR not build a trail?
Yep.
What's the
So
threshold?
so we don't have any like set in stone threshold of this is when we would or would not build a trail. We would have to go back and look at that specific trail, review the comments with the DNR interdisciplinary team, and determine is that trail really appropriate for that area. Between the interdisciplinary team comments and then those public comments, it would that trail be appropriate for the area? But we don't have like a strong threshold of this is one we will and this is one we don't because each system is unique.
Okay. David wants to know, are all trails marked with arrows to indicate the flow direction?
Yep. So any trail that is part of a trail system, whether it be a DNR or grant and aid, should be marked with those yellow arrows or the yellow blazers with the black arrows on them, and they'll help show you where to go as well as if you're coming up to an intersection or a stop sign or something like that. Um, so expect to see those while you're out on the trail. We also build the trails that you're not riding from marker to marker, so you may not see the next marker. They're more reassurance markers as you're riding on the trail. So,
Mm-hmm.
yep. So you'll see them out there, and remember, follow the yellow ones. Don't follow the orange ones.
And I imagine on the trails it's always stay to the right.
Yep. Yeah, you want to
So
stay to the right.
oncoming vehicles.
Majority of our trails are two-way traffic, So you always want to expect to see somebody coming from the other direction. So you don't want to ride too fast, and be looking ahead of you. I should also mention too, while you're on the trail, if you're encountering somebody coming from the other direction, let them know with your fingers, is there one person behind you or two or three or however many? That way they understand that there's more people coming behind you because the fallen person might be out of sight, depending on how the twists and turns in the trail.
Yep. Well, I don't see any new questions popping in. I think you answered most of mine in your presentation. I can't think of anything. Um, I was in. It was interesting to learn that as a resident, if I had company come up and they wanted to go trail riding, I could get a 30-day pass, or
Hmm.
I could go and ride with them or whatever. Um, we do most of our riding just on our little property and um, checking out deer stands and food plots and that kind of thing. But I know it's gaining in popularity. There's a lot of trailered ATVs coming up through our area, and they're looking for places to ride, and it's just a nice way to get out and enjoy, um, the outdoors. So be safe out there, and we can keep this thing going for a long time. Obey the rules. I've seen some horrible, horrible damage done to wetlands by ATVs. So,
Yep, yep. We want to
um,
encourage people to stay on the actual trails. We have the we manage the trails for those uses and to provide a fun experience. And um, some of that damage from wetlands will never recover. So
nope.
keeping people away from the wetlands and providing managed opportunities that are fun for folks. So.
We just had another question pop in
Mhm.
here. How does the DNR um, how is DNR planning to address the GHG emissions associated with off-highway vehicles?
Yeah, so I'm thinking GHG emissions is greenhouse gas emissions. OHVs do emit greenhouse gas emissions. There are more electric OHVs that are coming out. They're becoming more popular. So encouraging folks with electric OHVs. Like cars, it's going to take a while to get there, but hopefully someday soon we can get where a lot of OHVs are more electric and are quieter and um,
Mm-hmm.
emit less greenhouse gases.
Okay. Um, Ellie said, for driver safety, will the DNR ever propose a one-way trail in all trail systems?
We have a couple one-way trails out there. Some of our more tighter and narrower trails, or if they're in areas that are very sensitive and you don't want to build a wide trail. Um, at the national level, the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council, which is kind of the national um, group that provides trail training and user training, recommends against one-way trails for a couple reasons. One is because you're not expecting somebody to be coming the opposite direction on the trail, it tends to increase speed from the people going the correct way on the trail. And two, for one-way trails, if somebody gets to an area where they are no longer confident in their ability to continue on, they may turn around on the trail, and then you have somebody going the wrong way on a one-way trail. So we do have a couple instances of one-way trails out there, but um, generally they're in areas that are, very narrow. You can't get two-way traffic, and they're well marked so that folks understand that you're on a one-way trail and you can't go the other direction. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've answered all the questions that have come in. I want to thank you, Joe, for
yep,
taking the time to check in with us today and share your knowledge on the subject. You appear to have a great depth of knowledge, and Are you open to people contacting you for further information down the road?
Yeah, feel free. My email and phone were up on the screen there,
Yep.
so feel free to contact me if folks have more questions, or you can also always contact our information center at info.dnr@state.mn.gov, and they can
Okay.
provide you with a lot of information as well. So,
Great. So I just want to remind everybody that next week is episode 118, Reconnecting Fish Populations. And we're talking about removing barriers, dams, culverts, that kind of stuff that prevent fish from traveling through their natural um, areas. And we want to make some of that stuff accessible to the fish so that they can get back up and maybe it's their spawning area or whatever, but do some work on that. So be sure to check in next week for that. With that, I think we'll end the recording, Benji, and we'll move back into the